So Bernie Sanders supporters at his first rally were asked by Emma Vigeland of Rebel headquarters what they think of mainstream media. And the responses here are fascinating. I know that we've been told for a long time that, oh, the only people who hate the media are these far-right lunatics, the people at Trump rallies who, when he screams fake news and they love it and they think CNN sucks, but that's everybody on the left, they love mainstream media. You're about to find out that's definitely not true. Watch.
After a snowstorm, Bernie Sanders supporters are still turning out in droves at his rally in his hometown of Brooklyn, New York. So I've been going to a lot of Trump rallies asking supporters how they feel, and I wanted to ask Bernie Sanders supporters also how they feel, specifically about the mainstream media and how their coverage has been about Bernie Sanders. Do any of these supporters still listen to the mainstream media? And alternatively, what media sources do they actually prefer? Do you guys still consume mainstream media sources?
Yeah. Occasionally. I think it's like not for general news, but I think that general news in general, I mean, like the idea of facts and stuff like that are so hard to quantify in a modern state, you know?
No, I think that mainstream media is pretty much dead right now. I honestly, I blame mainstream media for the rise of Trump, because they went bananas over like all of their rallies just because they like the violence and all of that. So I don't really consume mainstream media, but I'm a person that likes seeing both sides, so I usually go for it sometimes. I even watch read Breitbart sometimes because I just like to be informed.
I do watch CNN and Fox News because, you know, I like to get different perspective, but when I watch it, I just get disgusted because it's so untrue.
The most mainstream media I've consumed has been in the last 2 weeks because he announced. I watched The View yesterday. I watched...
God forbid.
I watched Seth Meyers the other night, and I watched CNN when he had the town hall. But mostly it is definitely not mainstream media.
Bernie Sanders' campaign is what turned me off to the mainstream media, so now I get a lot of my news sources from places like the Young Turks or NPR or AP News, and sources that I wouldn't have otherwise considered.
From them not disclosing who was asking him the questions on CNN, to like the Washington Post having like 4 straight stories against him on the day he announced his presidency. I don't really follow them anymore, just the Young Turks.
I do, but only for comedy. You know, I just watch it and laugh, you know. That's why I watch you and like other progressives on YouTube mostly.
I mean, you know, the mainstream newspapers, New York Times, Washington Post, whatever, but I also look at a lot of independent stuff like Democracy Now! You know, I've checked out Young Turks, all kinds of other websites. I just don't really trust any particular website or particular source as the sole source.
So what are your preferred media sources then?
The Young Turks, obviously.
You gotta watch TYT with Chink, John, and Anna. They're the best. I love
And
them.
Emma, come on.
And Emma, yes, of course, Emma.
Yeah, please, man.
And typically it would be feeds through Facebook, so the Young Turks comes up often. I'd probably say, honestly, that's the biggest one, is the Young Turks.
I just want to say I love the Young Turks. I watch your show all the time. You guys are the true progressive channel. Shout out to Cenk and shout out to Anna.
I find it objectively hilarious how nobody knows how to pronounce Cenk's name. I mean, I guess he doesn't say it enough because everybody's like, oh, Cenk. For the longest time, I thought it was Cenk. And there's a decent chance I've called him Cenk to his face. Cenk. Yeah, because that's what it looks like to me, Cenk. I've definitely slipped up and called him Cenk to his face before. But it's Cenk, obviously. Well, not obviously, because they don't know, and they apparently watch TYT. But anyway, I find that hilarious. The comments on mainstream media are incredible. They're true, and this would make, you know, Chris Cuomo, Anderson Cooper, Aaron Burnett, the cackling idiots on MSNBC, it would make them keel over in pain and say, what? They would be stunned by this. They'd be floored by this. Okay, one of them said, I blame mainstream media for the rise of Trump. And interestingly enough, it seemed like he implied the reason for that is a lot of the coverage against Trump was so hacky that it actually helped him. Like, there's this fact that came out at the end of the last election which said he got billions of dollars worth of free advertising, Trump did, because the media covered him X amount. And a lot of people made the obvious counterpoint, myself included. Yeah, but most of that coverage was negative. But then it gets into, okay, but how exactly what was the negative coverage? Like, the specifics of how it was negative matters, because if you're doing a substantive story that paints Trump in a negative light, I think that's likely to hurt him. But if you're focusing on all the wrong things, it has the potential to help him. So I always go back to, there was a fascinating ad that was run by actually other Republicans against Trump in the primary, where it was like 30 seconds or a minute of Trump just cursing, using bad language. And the Republicans thought they got him. Mainstream media was running that ad and talking about it. And they honestly all thought, like, it's over, we got him. And people were just like, if anything, that makes me like him more. Because he's just cursing. It's not like, that's not a gotcha. But we live in this weird puritanical media environment where they think stuff like that is worth covering instead of policy. And I think there was a backlash to that, and people actually said, oh, I kind of like that. I kind of like what Trump is doing and not what the media is doing. Like, it's a lot of fake outrage, you know? The other example I give is, I remember for at least a full day, maybe more than maybe 2 or 3 days, there was this giant fake scandal because Trump at one of his rallies said, in the middle of this long thing about how I'm not going to outsource your jobs, I'm going to get rid of NAFTA, I'm going to make sure that you're hired. He was giving a rally where he was saying all that stuff, and in the middle of that rally, he said, we got to get rid of TPP. TPP is going to rape you. Or TPP is going to rape us, something like that. And then there was this giant media outcry of like, oh my God, he said rape. Do you realize that's insensitive to actual rape victims, sir? And again, that's one of those arguments where people are like, why are you being dumb to the context on purpose? And why are you getting like all PC over the words he's using? And I think that shit helped Trump. Because it allowed Trump to go out there and say, oh, dishonest media, fake news, why they always, they're always framing things negative about me. And again, don't get me wrong, a lot of the negative coverage was merited. But so much of the coverage was just stupid. And so much of the coverage was just like hyperventilating over nonsense. And I think that ended up helping him. So it doesn't make sense to blame mainstream media for the rise of Trump. Yeah, it definitely does. Another point one of them made was, well, Bernie's campaign turned me off to MSM, mainstream media. Why is that? Well, Washington Post ran just recently 4 negative stories in a short time frame when Bernie launched. And then there was the last time around where they ran like a dozen negative stories on Bernie in a 24-hour period. And it's just obvious they're doing a hit job because they represent a class of moneyed interests. They represent elitists, and they know Bernie Sanders would fundamentally change the system. So they're doing these disgusting hit jobs, and these guys notice it. Then you have one of them mentioned how CNN gave Hillary questions in advance, and that just totally destroyed CNN's credibility in their eyes, which makes perfect sense. I mean, you're pretending to be impartial, and then meanwhile, Donna Brazile is giving Hillary questions before the debate. I mean, that's sheer lunacy. And then, by the way, when we learn from WikiLeaks a lot of the terrible stuff about, how they rigged it against Bernie and how basically the DNC was literally acting as a campaign arm of Hillary Clinton, when we learned that, CNN kind of downplayed it and didn't really talk about the important stuff in those leaks. What they did is they tried to say, this is all from Russia, and then they would cover Russia like, look the other way because Russia. And I think that didn't, you're not going to get one over on these young lefties. They're paying attention, and they're like, you're covering this all wrong. And then one of them said, I watch mainstream media for comedy. Another one said, I don't trust them at all. Listen, we are the internet generation. So we have the ability, we have all the information in the world available at our fingertips at all times. So when you have some assholes in suits and ties who are covering unserious things, not focusing on policy, and it's just, they're doing this dog and pony show, this kabuki theater, that might work on some older voters in the sense of, like, Fox News viewers are all ancient, and they love that shit, and they eat up the partisan crap. And yes, MSNBC viewers, typically older liberals, who love to talk to me about Mueller, it makes me so horny. Like, that's what they do. But then the younger generation of lefties, they're so sick of that. And our generation has serious problems, man. We have insane amounts of student loan debt, for example. We have insane amounts of credit card debt. Most of us graduated into an economy that's fundamentally broken. We're either unemployed or underemployed. Healthcare, forget about it. People struggle with healthcare in terms of they can't afford it, or if they have it, it's not good enough. And we have all these problems. And then when people like this look at the media environment, they're like, you guys are just totally unprepared to deal with the current political era. And it's obvious. And so they go to places that talk about policy more and talk about fixing stuff more and give an honest assessment. Listen, the mainstream media cannot get around this basic fact. Bernie Sanders, if you look at his policy proposals, he's basically right in line with the majority of Americans for almost every policy he pushes for. Okay? Maybe there's like one or two, maybe three at most policies where he's not with the majority of Americans, but with like 15, 20 of his main, policy goals, he is speaking for the majority of Americans, even in many instances, the majority of Republicans. So when that's the case, if mainstream media is covering him and not putting that fact front and center, they're being dishonest. So when you have the coverage of Bernie Sanders and the overwhelming majority of the coverage is negative, and then meanwhile, here's this guy who's really been speaking truth to power for a long time and going after a corrupt political establishment for a long time and has been pushing for policies that are overwhelmingly popular for a long time, and all you have to say about him is negative shit, these young voters are going, something's up here. You guys are fucked up. Your whole business model is broken. Your whole system is broken. Your hosts suck. I'm done with you. And that's where we are today. So, and don't fall into the trap. A lot of people fall into this trap of, because Donald Trump screams fake news at the media, I am now going to, in a reactionary way, respond and say, now I'm defending mainstream media from all criticism. That's a dumb reaction. You can make the point that Donald Trump, when he screams fake news, it's only because, they portrayed him negative on something. Even if it's perfectly factual and even if it's perfectly substantive, he will scream fake news if they come after him. So yes, he's a self-serving, narcissistic idiot. But it is also true that quite apart from any question of Trump, mainstream media sucks. And there's no amount of propaganda that's going to override that fact in the eyes of these young left-wing voters. So keep that in mind and understand that new media is definitely the next wave. We're in the middle of that wave right now. And it's an amazing thing, but yeah. These young voters look at people like me. I'm more of a political commentator than a journalist or a reporter, but at least I'm open and honest about everything I believe, and at least I try to do my best in terms of getting the facts out there and then also giving my opinion. But these young voters look at shows like mine, even though none of them mention secular talk, but TYT and other shows, lefty shows, they look at us and they go, oh, they are eons better than CNN and their $1 billion budget or whatever the fuck it is. And that's kind of true. That really is. Because at least we're talking about real issues. Whereas they are oftentimes doing kabuki theater, and it comes across as disingenuous and dumb.